Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined throughout the show and want to interact with it more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. I love hearing all your opinions. You can do one or two things. Either click the dollar sign, leave a tip or donation in the comment section, or just leave any burning questions, comments, or concerns you may have. Just makes the show that much more better, makes it that much more interactive, gets your guys' thoughts out there as well. And it's not just me. It's always fun hearing what you have to say. But that will just leave that for your consideration, and we will transition into our second segment of the day on today's show. And that is talking about the waiver wire. Yes, the waiver wire is still very, very vital to your fantasy success this season. And I know you're thinking that there may not be that many more players out there that can truly contribute on the stretch for your team. As you know, we're already getting into the middle part of the season. We're almost 50% of the way through it in both real life and in fantasy. But there have been performances, whether it be from teams that are contenders or maybe out of the race, that prove that you still have to monitor week in, week out the waiver wire, because you never know when teams that look they're down and out, that we'll be talking about very often in this segment, have some hidden gems among their ranks that can prove to be very important in terms of your fantasy football playoff push, or whether or not you just want to solidify your team even further. Let's start off with that team, the Cleveland Browns. What an impressive performance for this Cleveland Browns team against a Baltimore Ravens team that looked like one of the best in the NFL. And it warrants a little bit of appreciation because of the fact it showed what the Browns should be if, they decide to completely tear down this Deshaun Watson experiment, which I feel like they should, after seeing not one but two quarterbacks now come in and lead this team effectively in his stead. And not for nothing, the two players who I'm talking about, one is, yes, the backup QB, the veteran backup in Jameis Winston, the great motivator of this Cleveland Browns team. But Cedric Tillman, because Cedric Tillman is still a young wide receiver, and what with Amari Cooper gone and no one really seemingly stepping up in the wide receiver position, this is a guy, I believe this is only his second or third year in the league, who I feel like the Browns can truly build upon. Yes, Jameis might not be the guy, as I believe that this is his second season in the league, so he still has a lot of enemies. He's only 24 years old. And like I said, Jameis, his performance definitely warrants potentially looking the waiver wire, but who knows how long that experiment will work for the Browns. Maybe he'll be gone by the end of the season. Maybe he'll find another home next season. But Cedric Tillman has staying power for the Browns. And maybe it will be reliant upon, the Browns tearing down and starting with a new quarterback. But I do think that what this showed is that the Browns still have a glimmer of optimism, even without all those draft picks they lost in this trade. Even without, the resources to retain some of these players after presumably, eating all that dead money that they might have to do to cut Deshaun Watson. I still feel like you have a solid foundation. It starts with a guy like Cedric Tillman. On the other hand, Jameis, this performance of his was typical, I feel like. This is like one of those Jameis Winston performances where he kind of struck lucky and, he could have played much worse in terms of what the stat line could have looked like. But overall, those mistakes didn't happen. And the stat line was sterling, and he had a decent fantasy day. So make of that what you will. Just know that it's going to be a very, very weird but exhilarating ride for the Browns and for fantasy football managers should they try and take a flyer on Winston. But just know that he really brings life and rejuvenation to this formerly moribund Cleveland Browns offense. And so that should excite some people, at least for this season, for Cleveland. And especially if you're looking for a team that doesn't necessarily appeal to many people fantasy-wise going forward. Now let's talk about two guys who, one of which has to step up, but the other has kind of quietly gone under the radar in such a potent offense. So I'll start off with Cade Otton, which is the guy who has kind of had to step up, be one of the focal points of this Tampa Bay offense, but with the absences of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And he has done so admirably. I envisaged that he would have a very important performance last week when I ranked him in my top tight ends for the week. But I wasn't expecting it to be to this kind of play. I feel like it would have taken him a little bit more time to adjust to being one of the top targets in this Bucs offense. But he really shows that he can exploit defense. He's a physical guy. And his star is quickly going to rise to the tight end position, especially from a fantasy perspective, because everyone's trying to find the next big thing at the tight end position. And Cade Otton, not for nothing, cannot be forgotten about because of the fact that, yes, once Mike Evans comes back, presumably after the bye, and Chris Godwin comes back next year, he'll continue to fall in the pecking order a little bit. But it will always matter that you have someone like Cade Otton to bail you out when things go haywire. And the fact that Baker trusted him enough to have him, I believe, lead this team in receiving yards was very impressive. So look for Cade Otton to be someone who has big games, maybe not, in crunch time, but in the near future, because he's still going to be someone that, once Mike Evans comes back even, is still going to be relied upon in this Bucs offense. And let's talk about Khalif Raymond here. Khalif Raymond is one of those weird players on this Lions team who feels like he can always contribute at any given time, but you never truly hear his name enough to really have him catch your attention. And so I feel like this performance from him, where he did a little bit of everything, got involved in special teams, got involved in terms of the skill position core, he really showed that the Lions are more than just, a team that can grind you to submission. They're a team that has versatility. And right now, Ben Johnson is like a puppet master, employing different players in different situations at his whim and finding ways to win. And Khalif Raymond's been doing it in all different aspects of this team. He's not just, a reliable receiver in certain situations. He's a guy who can step in on special teams and get the job done for you, as seen this past week. So Khalif Raymond, he's a bit of a risk just because of the fact, there's so many mouths to feed on the Lions, and you never know where he's going to be utilized and to what effect. But he still is someone who you can't necessarily forget about for the Lions because of the fact that it's so deep. You can't just look at the stars of this team and say, okay, they're going to carry the load more often than not, because that might not be the case. There are different ways for the Lions to score 52 points, so to speak, on any given team. They have so much depth and talent that even a guy like Khalif Raymond can warrant some inclusion from a fantasy perspective. And then the last guy who I have on my list before we kind of get into the miscellaneous players that I would like to name in this segment as well is Isaac Guerendo. Now, here's the thing about him, right? Because everyone's a little bit worried about this 49ers running back room, especially once Chris McCaffrey gets back. No one really knows how Kyle Shanahan will determine how guys like Mason and Guerendo will be involved in this offense once McCaffrey comes back. And that's the big concern for a lot of people. Do I sell Jordan Mason? Do I pick up Guerendo after his good performances? Or since McCaffrey's coming back, do I kind of have to be patient? As we get a comment here from Will Casper, I have the number 1 waiver, and I've had it all year. So I use it in Tyrone Tracy. He's going to be viable. We will get to that coming in a little bit because he's one of the running backs that I would love to talk about a little bit more at the end of this segment here. But I want to get back to Garendo as well because in the whole landscape of the waiver wire, running backs are a very appealing position, very tough position to navigate as well. So Isaac Garendo is someone who, very well could remain on the waiver wire for the rest of the season just because of the fact people know that he may not get as many touches in the future. But the reason why I don't think that is because now Kyle Shanahan knows that he can rely even more on the depth of his running back room, especially with the whole wide receiver situation, and who knows how Deebo Samuel will look going forward. Still battling that illness. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk out for the year. So you never really know how this 49ers offense will profile even with the return of Christian McCaffrey. So look for Isaac Garendo to still be in the reckoning as someone who you might want to pick up in the future. But to Will Casper's point here, and talking about someone who kind of will tie up some odds and ends for you in the running back position, I do like Tyrone Tracy as a viable fantasy asset. This is a guy who potentially was not going to be seen as someone to immediately have an impact this season, with the ineptitudes and struggles of the Giants running back this season, really stepping up and showing that they can build around this kid, that he has a future in this offense. And not for nothing, I feel like, for some reason, the Giants' offensive line is more well equipped to handle run blocking duties to open up holes for a guy like Tyrone Tracy than it is to protect Daniel Jones, which sounds very weird, but it's the truth, and it's what I've seen on the field. There are more ways for the Giants' O-line to win running the ball with Tracy than there is trying to operate with Daniel Jones in their center or out of the shotgun. So look for Tyrone Tracy to actually continue to add value this season to his name, because he is someone who has proven that he has staying power. So very good observation, Will, and I would definitely say Tyrone Tracy is someone who you should go out and get off the waiver wires. But we'll see how all of these guys play out, even Tyrone Tracy as well. But that will just do it for this segment. Coming up for our next segment, we will be continuing our positional rankings with the running back position. Which of these guys, maybe even, one of these guys who I just named will show up in a couple of weeks' time on this list. But for now, you're going to have to tune in and stick around to find out who I have on this week's list. So we'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of